If you would offer prayer, please feel free to raise your hand as they will come.
Mi Dios, a quien venero y adoro, soy testigo de tu unidad y tu felicidad. Desconozco tus dádivas tanto del pasado como del presente. For a long time. It's good to see you. Feel free to come down or stay there. Welcome to the Bahai Center in Nashville. Most of you probably know this, but I should say that the Baha'i faith is an independent world religion that is founded in the teachings of Baha'u'llah, who was a man who lived in the 19th century. The Baha'is believe that this period of history is the time of fulfillment when we'll see the establishment of the kingdom of God. One of the understandings of the kingdom of God is the ingathering of the whole human race to have one common spiritual understanding and see ourselves as one people founded on these divine teachings. There are Baha'i scripture, many of which are available over there in the bookstore, which you can search for yourselves. The purpose of these Sundays on the Bible and the Baha'i faith, and we do these once a month, is to try to understand how a person who wants to be sincerely faithful to the Bible and is studying the Baha'i faith, maybe a friend, or they've heard about it, or it's interesting, some ideas are interesting for them, or it's just strange, they want to know about it, or they've had a child who's converted, something like that. So they want to understand, how can I be faithful to the Bible over here and to what I've grown up with and understood, and accept the Baha'i faith, and then cross that bridge over into it without letting go of my faithfulness in what I knew growing up and in the Bible itself. There are two fundamental teachings or beliefs among Christians that make up Christianity. One is the idea that Jesus himself was divine and was the divine presence, the real presence of God among people. The other is the resurrection of Jesus and the resurrection at the end of time. Those are the two basic things, beliefs. How can we understand those, be faithful to the Bible, and come to accept the Baha'i faith and lose none of it? Or turn against our grandparents, or be unfaithful to their memory? This is the purpose of these presentations. We've been studying for the last 2 or 3 months about how can we believe that Jesus was the divine presence. Be faithful to that, understand what that means in the Bible, and then come over here and understand that Baha'u'llah, who's an entirely different man, is also the divine presence. Two men, we can't have two gods, we can't have confusion because reality is only one. So how can that be so? So we've spent the last 2 months talking about the Gospel of John, which is where this idea originates. And what we learned when we saw that is that in the Gospel of John, Jesus makes the statement, I am the truth, the way, and the life. And we learned that what that statement meant was that the author of the Gospel of John, who was Jewish, was writing to the other Jews who had thrown them out of the synagogue and said, and he was saying to the other Jews, Jesus is the way, he is the Messiah, he is the real presence of God. Don't miss out on it. Some in Christian tradition has come to mean and be interpreted that Jesus said, I am the way, but not the Buddhists or the Muslims or the Baha'is. A person is certainly free to believe that, but according to the faithfulness of the Bible, that's an additional meaning. Because the author of the Gospel of John did not mean, I am the truth, the way, and the life, and not the Buddhists, because that didn't have anything to do with this world. There were no Buddhists, there were no Baha'is, there were no Muslims. So this is an additional meaning to the Bible. Does that make sense? Because unfortunately I have to do this format. I don't know if people are understanding. If you're tired because you had a long night, feel free to sleep and wake up. The other point that we made about the Gospel of John is there are a series of statements in the Gospel of John that says, I am, I am, I am. The reason the Jewish writer of the Gospel of John put those in there is because the Jews he was writing to knew what the statement I am meant. It's taken from the Hebrew Bible when Moses is at the burning bush and he hears his voice saying, I am, meaning this is the voice of God. Therefore, by putting those words into the mouth of Jesus, the author of the Gospel of John is saying Jesus is real presence God, not a rabbi, not just a teacher, not just a guy down the block, not just a troublemaker, but the real divine presence. So that's where we are in our study. So today that brings us to Paul. I know some of you are Bahai background, but how many of you have heard of Paul or St. Paul or the Apostle Paul? You've heard of that? How many of you know anything about his life? Oh, so you do know something. Okay. The reason we have to talk about Paul next is because the Gospel of John is the first step, but a third of the Christian Bible is written by a man named Paul of Tarsus. So I thought we did today, he'll try to explain who he was and what did he believe about God. What did he think God was? The reason it's important to understand what Paul thought is that because Paul's letters are in the Bible, it's like if we put Robert's text messages into the Bible. What would happen is his text messages now would have unbelievable level of authority. That's exactly what happened with Paul. He wrote these letters not to write the Bible, which is what we'll get into, but to advise other Christians, for guidance. And his letters became a part of the Bible, and therefore his opinions have tremendous weight. Very substantial weight. Which, if we had a long time to talk about, we could get into that. I am not saying that this is a bad thing or a good thing. I'm simply saying that's reality. Paul is in the Bible, and his voice is the voice that we hear. Paul was born, and since this is the first time I actually have to look, so I'll be sometimes going like this. I'll have to refer to you notes. And Reza will need a few out there. Yeah, we'll go to the top. Paul was Jewish. He was born in the city of Tarsus. If you can visualize the Mediterranean, it's right on the Mediterranean coast of Turkey. It was a big Roman city, and Paul was born, he must have been born in a fairly wealthy family because he was a Roman citizen. And if you were poor or a farmer, you couldn't become a citizen. But he was a Roman citizen. And then he studied under the most famous rabbi or teacher in the Jewish world at this time, a man named Gamaliel in Jerusalem. So Paul was a very accomplished, very learned, very respected individual. He was a profound believer in what the Hebrew Bible and the Mosaic Law taught. He was not unhappy about it. He loved it. He saw himself as an extremely good believer. We know that because he says that. So why did he end up persecuting? Because he became a persecutor of Christians, because he saw Christians who were Jews at that time as being heretical to what the Mosaic Law taught. It's not because he said, I was psychotic, I was a bad man, so I went out and persecuted Christians. That's not at all what he thought. He said, I was very faithful to the law, and my faithfulness brought me to this kind of persecution because the Jews who were Christians believed that Jesus was the Messiah. But because Jesus had been executed as a common criminal, this violated the basic Mosaic law. Does that make sense? So Paul said, I've got to go out and attack these people, which is why he did that. On one of his journeys to go investigate this strange Jewish sect, he had an experience which he described several times in the Bible. Each time it's described is a little bit different. That doesn't matter. He had an experience of Jesus. He'd never met Jesus. He never spoke with him. He never shaken his hand. He knew probably very little about his life. But he had somehow a personal experience where he saw a light, or in another version, he heard a sound. By the way, it was such a, whatever he saw that day, he saw Jesus as living. It was so powerful, and this I have really stressed, that he came to believe in Jesus only based on his personal experience. Now consider that he had years of book learning. Have you ever met people who are very, very highly educated? It's very hard for them to change their ideas even a little bit because they're very proud of their learning. It's what their life is based on. Paul was that way. And yet when it came to belief and faith, he went purely with his personal experience. Everything he'd been educated in, everything he believed, everything he followed had told him to persecute Jesus because of the common criminal thing. But his personal experience caused him to change completely. Therefore, when Paul talks about faith, his opinion is individual faith, your faith, is the most important thing of all, because that's how he went about his life. Does that make sense so far? So, once he came, he had this experience of Jesus. He didn't convert in the sense that he went from one religion to another. There was no such thing as Christianity. It's not like a Christian becoming a Bahai. That's a conversion. Or a Muslim becoming a Christian. That's a conversion. Paul went from being a really good Jew to an even better Jew because he believed that Christ was the fulfillment of Judaism. So, he realized that he began to travel all over the Mediterranean and talk about Jesus. He would go from city to city, and usually he would set up a little business, and then he would go in town and talk in the synagogue, usually get himself thrown out. He, according to his own testimony, was, the Romans had these things where they got eaten by lions. It was very unpleasant. Well, evidently Paul was thrown in one of those rings with wild animals. He was arrested multiple times. He was beaten and sent out of cities. So he was not some guy living up there in the clouds. He was right there in the midst, trying to explain to people about Jesus. And as he went from city to city, he would write to the people. Like, let's say he had a few people had started to become followers, and then he would leave. Well, what was he going to do with these people? They didn't have anything about what were they going to do? Usually he wanted to come back for a visit, but he couldn't always come back for a visit because he didn't have, there weren't cars, there weren't text messages, there weren't cell phones. So he would say, he would have companions who were with him, he would say, go and visit them again and help them. And if that was not possible because they were in prison or they'd been eaten by lions, he would write them letters. And in those letters he would say, dear brethren of city of so-and-so, whatever the city. And he would give them the advice he wanted to give them. When his Christian followers would get those letters, they would stand up in the Christian community and read them aloud. The letters that he wrote were living letters. They were meant to put Paul there in the presence of other people. Yes? Kind of like that. We'll get to that. The reason I'm going into this excruciating detail, I don't know if this is too much detail or not, is that it is very important to understand what those letters are and what they are not. Because if you believe that they are something they are not, then it's confusion. And then it makes the studying of the Baha'i faith very difficult. Paul's letters were meant to be performed. Somebody would stand up and do the letter. The letters were not like letters today, which say, dear Corky, how are you? Hope you're doing good and your family's good. I hope you're doing your prayer. They weren't those kinds of letters. They were letters written in set forms. In the ancient world, and we don't do this anymore because we do text and email and other things, the ancient world had set forms. And people wrote letters in set forms. They didn't just write personal love. Hey, Vicky, LOL, how are you? They had set forms that people understood what those set forms were. We don't do that anymore. One of those set forms, for example, is the dialogue, the most famous one, where you hear questions and answers. It's not meant to be always Paul speaking. These are different characters. In the letter, he might have Corky asking a question, and then Paul answering. Does that make sense? Because not everything he says in his letters means he thinks it. He's writing it in a form, the diatribe, the dialogue. So understanding the form is crucial to understanding what he was saying. And the last thing I'll say about his letters, so they're written in these forms. The last thing I will say is, Paul wasn't trying to write the Bible. He wasn't going home at night to his apartment with his friend and saying, I'm really behind on my chapters. I've got to get this Bible out before I get killed. That's not what he was doing. He was simply writing letters of advice to the people whom he saw as his children. Because in the ancient world, a man who taught, if I taught you about Christianity, I was your father. And therefore you are my children, therefore it's my responsibility to teach. Does that make sense? These are, I think I've covered all the major points. These are what the letters of Paul are. They are written in certain forms, they are meant as guidance, they are based on Paul's personal grace experience of God and Jesus. They are meant to guide. They are not meant to be a Bible necessarily, or not. They were things that he wrote to them. And they are meant for pastoral advice toward those Christians. Now, over the years, Paul's letters were so good for the Christian believers that they kept them. Because we get letters from the Universal of Justice, so we can read those over and over again. But in the ancient times, what are they going to read? So they would read the letters of Paul and keep them. And over 400 years, they were very useful for Christians, and they eventually were included in the canon of the Bible. And once Paul's letters of advice were put into the Bible, you know what they became?
The Bible.
The Word of God. If you had told that to Paul, I have no idea what he would think. But it would be interesting to know what he thought. I'm going to close with this little biography of Paul by making this comment. We're going to read these first quotations. You have to go to the top. There you go. Many Christians in the 20th century, because we've had great concern for civil rights, and including the civil rights of women, for example. You know, we had the women's movement was very important in the 20th century. Paul has become really unpopular. Paul, when many Christians now read the Bible, it's like they love Jesus because he says, love one another. And he goes and he feeds the poor and he helps the downtrodden. And then they meet Paul. And Paul he's pretty nasty in some of the letters. He says things like, women be silent in the assembly. Have you ever heard that, those who were in church? This is very difficult for people to understand. To understand why he says the things, we have to know the background of what I just covered. But unfortunately, many Christians and some Baha'is see Jesus as the good guy. He's like floating up there. You know, he's got a really nice beard, and he says, blah, blah. And Paul as the bad guy. And that has persisted. Well, Christians can think whatever they want because they make up their own minds. In terms of Baha'is who think that, I just want to be clear, there is no foundation in the Baha'i writings for this. The reason he says those things has to do with the context in which he lived. He was not saying to Allison, don't talk. He was speaking to people back then in a certain context. So there's no foundation that Paul is a misguided, bad human being. In fact, here are two passages. Do we have a volunteer who would like to read? Be brave and read and see. Corky Wingy.
Physical nearness or remoteness is of no importance. The essential fact is the spiritual affinity and ideal nearness. Judas Iscariot was for a long time favored in the holy court of His Holiness Christ, yet he was entirely far and remote, while Paul the Apostle was in close embrace with His Holiness. Paul the Apostle was in his early life an enemy of Christ, while later he became his most faithful servant.
That's a little summary background. I have some handouts if it interested you, if you can read it. Now we can get to the main part of the subject. Now we know a little bit about who Paul is and why he's in the Bible. And so we're going to look at what Paul believed about God. What did he think God was? Paul was a Pharisee Jew, and as a Pharisee Jew, he believed as the first and central point of the Jewish belief this passage from the book of Exodus. You got to scroll down a little bit. I am the Lord. Yeah, there you go. Somebody would like to read that central passage? Corky, I'm going to go with you since you read that so beautifully.
I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath or in the waters below.
In the world, ancient world, religion was different than now. Now you come into a room like this, there's a guy up there with a guitar, there's a choir, and we're singing, and then we talk about how we feel and what we believe. This is not all ancient religion was. In the ancient religion, the ancient world, I should say, there were large temples. And in those temples, there were representations of a god. For example, the Egyptians, the grandfather civilization of northern Africa, had magnificent temples, 20 times the size of this building. Magnificent art. In the core of the temple, there would be a statue, and that statue was the god. Or in the city of Athens, there was this, I think it's 20 or 30 feet tall statue of Athena in stone and gold. And once a year, the statue would be taken out, and people would venerate the statue. Most people understood that, yeah, the statue was God, but also that Athena was a spirit in some way. But this is how religion was done in the ancient world. You didn't come to a building like this and participate. Your opinion, our opinion as people who came to the temple, didn't matter. It didn't matter what Michael believed about Osiris, the god of rebirth, who was the main god of the Egyptians. What he believed didn't matter. His faith didn't matter. Didn't matter anything. Michael came because he was worried about Osiris. He didn't want his crops not to grow. He didn't want his daughters to suffer. He didn't want, so he would come to the temple and give offerings and ask the priest for blessing. He didn't have a personal relationship with Osiris. You know, they would say personal relationship with God. He didn't have a personal relationship. We had to keep Osiris happy so that the crops would be reborn. Jews looked at this kind of belief, a kind of way of doing religion, as blasphemy. Because to them, God could not be known and seen. Therefore, when you looked at a statue, it could not be God. So if Osiris, I don't know if you can picture Osiris in your mind, with the green face, beautiful statues. If Osiris, the statues, people were looking at, they couldn't be worshiping God, so what were they worshiping? They were worshiping, many Jews, some kind of demon. Or they were engaged in idol worship. Idol worship is the worship of an object or a man in place of the God. And God, for Paul, was transcendent. That means he went beyond human understanding, and he was unknowable. You couldn't see him. Does that make sense? This is important when we consider Jesus as divine. Do we worship Jesus as the divine presence of God, or are we worshiping the man? So Paul believed that God was transcendent. Here's what Paul thought about idols. You can scroll down now. While Paul was number 5. He came to Athens, which was one of the big cities, and there were temples everywhere. And as Paul looked around, he was not pleased by seeing all these idols. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in the temples built by human hands. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. So Paul saw these idols as a Christian, and he saw them as misleading people away from the reality of God, which he believed to become through Jesus. Here's what the Baha'u'llah teaches about the nature of God. You can scroll down to That always makes me dizzy when you do that. Scroll down to, quote, they do every discerning and illumined heart. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. There you go. Here's what the Baha'u'llah teaches. Like Paul, he taught that God was transcendent and unknowable. The reason Baha'u'llah teaches the same thing is because Judaism and the Baha'i faith are the same religion. They're just expressed at different times. Here's from the Book of Certitude.
To every discerning and illumined heart, it is evident that God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immensely exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporal existence, ascent and descent, egress and regress. He is and has ever been veiled in the ancient eternity of his essence, and will remain in his reality, everlastingly hidden from the sight of men. No tie of direct intercourse can possibly bind him to his creatures. He standeth exalted beyond and above all separation and union, all proximity and remote. No sign can indicate his presence or his absence, inasmuch as by a word of his command all that are in heaven and on earth have come to exist, and by his wish, which is the primal will itself, all have stepped out of utter nothingness into the realm of being, the world of the visible.
That's, for those of you who are studying the Baha'i faith, that paragraph in the Book of Certitude is a wonderful starting point to meditate on that. The idea that we've come out of the world into the world of the visible. How did Paul believe we knew God? So if we didn't know the statues, and the statues were nothing, then how does that? Paul believed that we knew God through Jesus, based on one's own personal experience of that. Here is the next one. There is number 7.
I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ.
Baha'u'llah teaches that the way we know about God is not through our own efforts, not through statues and dogmas, but through our knowledge of who is the manifestation of God for today. That's why it's important to look at Baha'i faith and consider it, because if Baha'u'llah is the divine presence for today, then to know God's will for this time, we have to know the will of that manifestation. Number 8.
The door of the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, being thus closed in the face of all beings, the source of infinite grace, according to the saying, His grace hath transcended all things. My grace hath encompassed them all, hath caused those luminous gems of holiness to appear out of the realm of the Spirit in the noble form of the human temple, and be made manifest to all men, that they may impart unto the world the mysteries of the unchangeable being, and tell the subtlety of his imperishable essence.
The gems of holiness in that passage are the manifestations of God, like Jesus. What did Paul believe? So we know God through his manifestation, and then the Spirit of God comes into our soul through that. We have a personal experience. And then we go out in the world. All of us have jobs. All of us go to school. How does God work in the world? Are volcanic eruptions God? Is climate change God? Is some event that happens to you, is that God? How is God working? Because once you believe, then what? Then what happens? Can we say some prayers and make something happen? In the ancient world, if you came to a temple and you gave to the head priest some rice, goats, things like that, You could count on something happening as a result of that. Does that make sense? You could ask for something to happen. How did Paul believe God worked in the world? Paul believed that God worked through the efforts of human beings. So in many statements, which we won't go through now, he would say, by the grace of God, I have done this. He works through the efforts of human beings. What does Baha'u'llah say about that? Scroll down through the passage. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Top 11. In the most important book of Revelation of the High Faith, the book of laws, Baha'u'llah says that the first duty is belief. Okay, now you believe that Baha'u'llah is the manifestation of God. But the second duty is what? That you obey, you put it into action. Follow the teaching. There's a difference between belief and faith. Belief is, yes, Baha'u'llah is the manifestation of God. Or yes, Jesus is the manifestation of God. That's an idea. And then what? You have to go out and do it. Faith is not belief. Faith is a living response to what you believe. If you believe in gravity, that idea, you don't step out of the 10th floor window. You just don't do that. If you believe that Jesus is the manifestation of Baha'u'llah, you do something about it. Here is that passage.
The first duty prescribed by God for his servants is the recognition of him who is the dayspring of his revelation and the fountain of his law, who represents the Godhead in both the kingdom of his cause and the world of creation. It behooveth everyone who reaches the most sublime station, the summit of transcendent glory, to observe every ordinance of him who is the desire of the world. These twin duties are inseparable. Neither is inseparable without the other.
Make two last points and then wrap and give a little summary. Paul was in a very, very difficult position. Very difficult. He'd been raised a Pharisaic Jew. He believed it 100%. Then he had this intense personal experience of God through Jesus Christ, even though he didn't meet him. Now, he gave up all that learning for that moment of personal experience, which brought him to a very difficult situation, which was, whose God was God? Because when he was a Pharisaic Jew, that God was theirs. The God of Israel that one went to in the Temple of Jerusalem, or the synagogue, he was not the God of the Egyptians, like Osiris and Isis. Those people were worshiping statues and stones. He was the God of Israel. But now, hold it. Now there's this man who we're worshiping, and we've given up this learning. So whose God is that God? Does that make sense? That was a real problem for Paul. It's too complicated to go into great length, but the long and the short of it is this. Paul's great depth of understanding, a moment of understanding, is that he realized that God and Jesus were not for one group, but they were universal. Jesus was the universal manifestation of God of the Baha'i Church. He was the universal Lord. He was not the Jewish Lord or the Jewish God. And and therefore all people should know about Jesus. He was universal. And then Christianity went from being a religion of a Jewish religion, to being a world religion. And Paul is in great part responsible for this. It's not unlike the understanding that Baha'u'llah and the central figures about the faith are not the fulfillment of Islam only. They are for the entire world. Which brings me to my last point. And this is philosophical. This is for phasing out of philosophy. There were two ways of looking at the world in the time of Paul. The great Greek philosophers that you've heard about in school, like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and others. The Greek philosophers were the great thinkers of their time. They believed that things went in cycles. A cycle goes like this. You start here, you go around, and it ends there. Does that make sense? Always cycling like this. You know, people say, oh, the more things change, the more they stay the same. You ever heard that? Or when you ask, hey, Cook, how's it going? You go, same old, same old. In other words, you've gone here, but you've come back to the beginning. Greek philosophers saw history as cycling. Paul saw, like Jews, saw things as going in stages. They were in one stage now, and then they were going to be rescued by a Messiah. So history went in stages. Baha'u'llah teaches, and the Baha'i faith teaches, and this is very important for other Christian beliefs, that history goes in cycles and in stages. We are going from stage to stage in human life. And we are going in cycles. We are going in stages because today we've got cell phones and airplanes. In Paul's time you had a horse or your own feet. So there are enormous changes. People of different races now marry. That didn't happen. There are stages in human development. But there are also cycles. For example, when Jesus came and he spoke to the Jews, they rejected him. They had the spirit of opposition. When Baha'u'llah came to the Muslims in Iran, the clergy, not all of them, many clergy rejected him. The spirit of their opposition has returned. So it's in cycles. This is very important because Baha'is believe we are in a new stage of human power. This is the day of the ingathering of all human people, of the whole human race. The world is not coming to an end. It's going to keep going into futures that we can't imagine. And the Baha'i faith is that latest stage. It is also true that in this stage, a person who is studying the Baha'i faith can choose to reject it. So that spirit of rejection can exist also. And if I think of history in the Baha'i faith like this, it's going in cycles, it's going in stages. It's always changing, but it's also the same. Which is important if you're studying the Baha'i faith or thinking about making a transition from Christianity to the Baha'i faith. Because that's why Baha'i, we are in a new stage of human power. Hope that was interesting for you. It's kind of long, but I've never done this version before. So we saw that Paul's beliefs about God were very similar to those taught by Baha'u'llah. We gained some understanding of why he wrote those letters and how they came into the Bible. Next time we'll look at some of his letters and we'll try to understand this. What did Paul believe Jesus was? What did he think about Jesus? And that's what we'll do next time. Thank you. Mr. Bonnie, did you want to say something? I cut you off because we're kind of a group. But because you're my old friend, please.
The point is in Christianity, that Jesus directly himself, he introduced himself. In the beginning there was a word, and the word was with God, and the word became flesh. That Jesus said him directly, is one.
Everything that's in the Gospels has been reported. So the Gospel of John, where that statement is taken, was written by the man named John. The people who were with John were Jews who had been thrown out of the synagogue. And they were saying, this is what Jesus said. Do we know 100% this is what Jesus said? No. Does that mean it's false and inaccurate? No. But we know that Jesus said the same thing in different ways because the same thing in different Gospels appears in different places. The people who wrote the Gospels, like this one, were not trying to write a day-to-day history. On Tuesday he did this, on Wednesday he did that. They were writing about the life of Jesus in such a way that you would understand something. So the writer of the Gospel of John was trying to show people Jesus was divine, he was the way. That's what he was trying to show. One more thing, and then we have a closing prayer.
So if it is so, the doctrine of the Christianity that the divine Jesus is the same God, so it's against the Islam doctrine, because in Quran they oppose that the Jesus was not a God. This is in Islam. And also in the Bahai faith, as we read it, that Baha'u'llah said never ever is possible the reality of God comes to the human body.
Next time we're going to study Paul's opinions, beliefs on who Jesus was. And then after that, we're going to study what Mr. Bahai is talking about, which is church doctrines. After Paul passed away and Christianity continued to spread, the fathers of the church had to put together some form of belief that people could agree on, because it was total chaos otherwise. And they came up with two central doctrines: the doctrine of the Trinity, the doctrine of the Incarnation. Interestingly enough, all the fathers who designed these doctrines were North African and Near Eastern. So we often think of it being a European idea. But it came from their schools of thought. When we get to that, we'll get into the history of how Jesus made that transition from the divine presence to a deity. Yes, Courtney, you want to close with a comment and close with a prayer, would you? Please. The Council of Nicaea, when many people died in the process of those decisions being made. I mean, it was a bloodbath where these people came together to make these decisions as to what Christianity was going to be. Ruben, I know that anyway.
We'll get into that. We can talk about why that is. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hope you Good closing prayer.
Whatsoever occurs in the world of beings is life for his loved ones and fire for the people of sedition and strife. Even if all the losses of the world were to be sustained by one of the friends of God, he would still profit thereby, whereas true loss would be borne by such as are wayward, ignorant, and contemptuous. Although the author of the following saying had intended it otherwise, yet we find it pertinent to the operation of God's immutable will. Even or odd, thou shalt win the wager. The friends of God shall win and profit under all conditions, and shall attain true wealth. In fire they remain cold, and from water they emerge dry. Their affairs are at variance with the affairs of men. Gain is their lot, whatever the deal. To this testifies every wise one with a discerning eye, and every fair-minded one with a hearing ear. Baha'u'llah.